Good afternoon. It's Friday the 20th of March 2020, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
We will get straight on with the latest coronavirus statistics, and the number of cases has now risen to 253,796. 10,406 people have now passed away, so that's gone over the 10,000 mark now. And 89,062 recoveries. So we have 154,328 active cases at the moment. Of those, 146,864 are mild, and 7,464 are considered serious or critical. So that's the latest statistics. One more quick statistic for you, and that is that the number of people who have now applied for some kind of unemployment benefit has hit the 70,000 mark since the emergency procedures began. So now, Patrick, on Wednesday we were talking about the forthcoming coronavirus bill, this emergency legislation that the UK government is going to put in place. Well, that has now been published. So let's have a quick look at that. Now, what they said about it, if you remember, was that it would be all about containing and slowing the virus, easing legislative and regulatory requirements, enhancing capacity and the flexible deployment of staff across essential services, managing the deceased in a dignified way, and supporting and protecting the public to do the right thing and follow public health advice. Now, of course, if you get behind the words of that last comment, supporting and protecting the public to do the right thing and follow public health advice, that means perhaps deploying the army. It certainly means giving the police the powers to enforce whatever is required. Now, looking at the media coverage of this morning, before the bill was published, we had comments. You know, they were highlighting that there was likely to be military deployment. They were talking about a 6-week quarantine, which would be enforced by the police. And they were also suggesting that the government was ultimately going to ask, or is in the process of asking, mobile phone companies to provide access to location data because they want to make sure that people are actually following this. Well, just before we came on air, the government published the bill, Patrick, so I just want to run through a couple of points here that we don't have slides for, but I want to run through them anyway. The first key thing which should put everybody's mind absolutely at rest is that Matt Hancock, the Secretary of State for Health, has made the following statement under Section 19(1)A of the Human Rights Act. He said, in my view, that's in Matt Hancock's view, the provisions of the coronavirus bill are compatible with the convention rights, so we don't have to worry. It's all compatible with our human rights, Patrick.
So that's a legal opinion from Matt Hancock himself, who is he's a scholar in international law. Is that right? Well,
I'm not sure how qualified he is to actually make this statement, though, but he's made it. Apparently, Priti Patel is going to be given the power to ask ports and airports to temporarily close and suspend operations if there's a shortage of border force staff. Police and immigration will be given the power to detain a person and quarantine them if they are or might be infectious. And then other aspects of the legislation are allowing for recently retired doctors, medical students to be registered as regulated healthcare professionals, social workers who've recently left the profession and can be brought back. People that are employed will be able to take emergency volunteer leave for up to 4 weeks with a compensation fund. And then in terms of dealing with people who've passed away, just one doctor's opinion rather than two would be able to deal with the death certificate and so on. And then also, perhaps somewhat concerningly, just one doctor's opinion rather than two can be used for detaining people under the Mental Health Act. Then schools for forced to close, that's in this legislation. Greater use of video and audio links in courts. Now, what was interesting about that is that the legislation makes it clear that judges would be able to take part in trials via video link, but juries would not. So any jury that attends a trial or is required to attend a trial would have to do so in person. So that remains the case. The temporary appointment of judicial commissioners who authorize warrants under anti-terror law if there's a shortage, and they would have the restrictions on gatherings and events and so on. Now, there is a sunset clause in this bill, Patrick. It says that the Act expires at the end of the period of 2 years, beginning with the day on which it's passed, subject to subsection 2. So subsection 1 is that there's a sunset clause, and subsection 2 says that basically the sunset clause doesn't apply to section 2, Schedule 1, to Section 4 and Schedule 3, to Section 5 and Schedule 4, to Sections 10, 11, and 12, to Section 16, to Section 18, brackets 11, to Section 12, Section 20, brackets 7, Sections 56, 7 to 66, Sections 68 to 70, Parts 2 to 5 of Schedule 6 and Schedule 7, Parts 3 of Schedule 7 and Section 9, and so it goes on. And there's just paragraphs, sections, schedules, all excluded from the sunset clause. So this act needs to be looked at in detail, and I don't know what the implications are yet.
So so basically what you're saying, Mike, is all the caveats nullify the real sunset clause, meaning that the bill will never reach sunset because of all the caveats they put in to create a circular situation where it renews itself constantly.
Well, no, it won't renew itself constantly. What it's saying is that all those sections and schedules and subsections that they exclude from the sunset clause will remain on the statute books after the sunset clause has been invoked. So after the 2-year period, those clauses will stay on the statute books. So this needs to be looked at very, very carefully to work out exactly what powers government is claiming in perpetuity.
In perpetuity, that's the important part.
Absolutely. So as we were saying there, military deployment is certainly on the cards. And we had a statement from Nick Carter, General Sir Nick Carter, who's the head of the Armed Forces this morning, saying that the indications are that this disease will spike around late May and early June. We are to be prepared for our collective posture to be on an operational footing by mid-April, recognizing that this could endure for 6 months or so. So that's what the Army's saying, but the Army also clearly sensitive to the fact that people are going to be concerned about military on the streets. And so they published a little article on Medium this morning, Military Aid to Civil Authorities, the COVID Support Force. And they say that in times of crisis, the government often calls on the military to contribute to the national response due to their specialist skill set and equipment. This is called Military Aid to Civil Authorities, or MACA. As the government and nations respond to the coronavirus outbreak behind the scenes, a team of military planners from the Royal Navy, British Army and Royal Air Force have been embedded within government departments to offer expert advice. So far, the military has also assisted in bringing British citizens home. So they're trying to soften the implications of military deployment on Britain's streets. Now, contrary to what's perhaps going on in the United States, maybe you can say something about this. I'm not saying too much about the use of Royal Engineers or this aspect of the military. It's more, it seems to me, about supporting the police in enforcement of the rules. I
think if you look at the total number of active duty service people in Britain, Mike, you've been reporting, the UK column has been reporting for quite some time, many years in fact, about how the forces have been pared down over the years. So you really don't have a lot in terms of forces. So really a lot of this is optics, Mike. It's going to be a high profile show of force in very public places, high value infrastructure assets, alongside police in high visibility areas. So it's really about projecting the military's power or the military's assistance, as they're saying, okay? So in terms of how much difference it actually makes in reducing the spread of the coronavirus, that's of course debatable. And I might add on that last comment, Mike, how does the government know that it's going to spike in June when in fact the epicenter of the epidemic or pandemic in China, apparently it's already spiked. How's that possible?
It's beyond spiked, really, isn't it? It's finished. I mean, they are very, very few new cases each day, and they really seem to have got on top of it.
Is that because we're more at risk and more susceptible to the disease in the West?
We might be talking a little bit more about that later on.
Okay, than the Chinese. I'm
Yes.
just throwing these questions out because trying to work out and understand, where the policy is coming from.
Absolutely. Now, on both sides of the Atlantic, Patrick, it's incredible. This is being presented as us being on a war footing. It's very much on a war footing. So the NHS put out a little news release today talking about the fact that former doctors and nurses are being told your NHS needs you to tackle the greatest global health threat in history. And they're describing these doctors and nurses as the Nhs Army. So everything, we're getting all this militarized language and very much being told that this is, we're being organized as if we were at war. But this is very much an invisible enemy, we're being told.
Yes, we have to sort of marshal all of our forces and resources to fight this invisible enemy. We need to pull together to defeat this invisible enemy. And it was interesting, Mike, I was overheard a conversation between public health workers and actually students, medical students. And apparently, and you can probably validate this in your reporting, but they're loosening the qualifications to be a frontline health worker in this time of crisis, to mobilize more people, health professionals, and so forth. But when I look through the media reporting, Mike, I don't see any reports of many hospitals that are being at the moment overrun with COVID-19 cases, or they're not coping. And I might point out, Mike, that there's probably a lot of people listening and a lot of people in the country that have been refused care in the past due to staff shortages, due to lack of resources, or at peak times being told to go away and come back to A&E the following day, or go back to your GP and get another referral to another clinic. Okay, so this is something that's happening constantly over the years, trying to manage resources within the NHS. It's a big challenge. In fact, there was big protests about this really for the last couple of years about NHS services. So, but we don't see yet that the coronavirus is overwhelming the system with sick and dying victims yet. So, but we're told that this is coming and it's inevitable, and this is what the statistics tell us. But we're having a hard time finding the provenance to some of those claims right now, and we're looking really hard, and we'll continue to look for the data that helps you come to those conclusions which policymakers are making.
Yes. Okay. Well, look. Let's move on to Ecuador, Patrick, and what's happened here. This coronavirus related.
This is unbelievable. So look at this. This is in the second largest city in Ecuador. That's Guayaquil in Ecuador, and the mayor has shut down the airport, refused this Spanish flight from landing because of fears that there were coronavirus infected people on board, and forced the plane to turn away. They've put police cars in the runway to keep the plane from landing. I might add, Mike, this is a violation of international law by Ecuador by doing this. But this shows the absolute hysteria that is gripping a lot of parts of the planet, Mike, whereby I have to say that even if you're not infected with the coronavirus, it seems to induce mass brain damage to people who aren't even infected. Why they would make a decision like that in Ecuador is just unbelievable, and I might add inhumane and illegal as well. So.
Right, well, we're going to look at mainstream media in a moment, but let's just remind everybody that if you'd like to support what the UK Column does, you can do that over at ukcolumn.org/community. Your support is much needed and much appreciated. Now, here is Martin Clark. He's the guy that set up Mail Online, which is the online part of the Daily Mail. He did that in 2007.
The greatest clickbait site in the history of the planet.
Absolutely, and it is the biggest moneymaker in terms of online news on the planet. So he's very proud of that. Well, he sent an email out to staff to reassure them about their jobs and so on. This is really the crux of what he said. Let's hope this thing doesn't last that long, but the next few months are likely to define the world we live in for years to come. They will define your individual lives, and how we rise to the challenge, that's the Daily Mail and their reporters, how we rise to the challenge of covering them will define our careers. So this is his position on what the Daily Mail should be doing.
And I couldn't agree with him more, Mike.
Absolutely.
I couldn't agree with him more.
So Patrick...
However, we might be looking at this in a different way than he is.
Well, absolutely. So I just wanted to run through a couple of the headlines from Mail Online this morning, just to put this in a bit of perspective. So here's one. Pubs are packed, not a brain cell in there. Anger as young revelers still ignore calls to stay at home as Weatherspoon's boss insists his bars will stay open during coronavirus crisis. And the main headline is dying for a drink, because you can't have a Daily Mail headline with respect to coronavirus that doesn't include dying, death, fear, or some such rhetoric. Let's follow that up with this one. Terrifying. We've got to be terrified about this. Terrifying footage inside Italy's crisis wards shows coronavirus patients in bubble helmets struggling to breathe as doctors warn their best efforts are not enough after fatalities soared by 475 to 3,405, higher even than China. So there is some fact in that headline, but the way that the headline is written, as you say, absolute clickbait. It's designed to strike fear in the hearts of the person that's reading it.
Sure. Can you go back to the previous slide? I just want to comment on that. You know, this is misleading on a number of levels. First of all, this implies that coronavirus is basically a death sentence. In other words, if someone coughs in your vicinity or touches you, or you touch a piece of a 5-pound note that's been touched by someone, that's a death sentence. That's not actually true. The other thing is that young people are probably in the lowest risk category. And I know people are going to point to the recent New York Times article and other claims that are coming out in America saying, no, the youth are also being afflicted by this. No, actually the statistics, the numbers don't show that. This is very low risk for young people. And again, the numbers, and I keep pointing this out because it's a fact, the numbers for the regular seasonal flu absolutely dwarf the numbers for the coronavirus right now, when we're already 3 months into the crisis. So when is the coronavirus going to catch up to the regular seasonal flu in terms of fatalities and people hospitalized? So far, Mike, it hasn't. And so we're waiting for it to at least become, a quarter of the regular seasonal flu numbers, and then we could say that, it's hard to compare them when you're looking at the numbers. But people will say it's more contagious, therefore it's more dangerous. But yet the fatality numbers aren't there. They're not there in China, and they're not there globally.
Right, and just to reinforce your comment about people being close to each other. I mean, we were already seeing how this rhetoric in the media, this fear rhetoric in the media about distancing and so on, is starting to affect people. In France yesterday, we had video on social media coming out of France where people at a cashiers at a supermarket were fighting each other because somebody thought that the person behind him wasn't standing far enough away from him. This is the degree of social breakdown we're starting to see.
Well, I was in my local Sainsbury's this morning, and there were a safety tape, a box which was taped out about 3 to 4 feet from the cashiers, and I accidentally had my foot over the edge, like you would on the underground or something, and the train driver normally honks his horn. In this case, it wasn't the train driver, it was the cashier saying, please step back. This is a quarantine zone. This is in our local Sainsbury's. So if you go into Sainsbury's, you'll see that this is policy now, at least for the local shops. They'll have it taped up with safety tapes. But if the infection radius is 6 feet, really just by standing there 3 feet from the cashier behind a piece of tape, I'm already breaking quarantine technically. But everybody is going absolutely hysterical and in many different ways, and I'm going to say that the corporation is enforcing this with their employees, Mike.
Yes.
They have to follow these guidelines and regulations, otherwise they could get sacked.
Right.
And so, is this correct? Is this the right way to be dealing with this crisis, this problem? Is this over the top? Or are they just being extra safe just in case? I think these are all legitimate points of debate. And I think people should be discussing them rather than shutting down the conversation, really, because we could learn a lot during this time about human nature, about the nature of society, about our relationship with government and with each other. So it's actually very important to be talking about these issues.
Yes, so let's get back to the mail then. The invisible enemy, well, there you go. The invisible enemy unmasked. Chilling microscope images reveal the reality of coronavirus as it erupts out from the surface of a human cell. This is unbelievable. You know,
the invisible enemy.
This could be an extremely interesting article, but instead they choose to spin it with the fear rhetoric, chilling microscope images.
This is fear porn. Listen, if you look at a lot of things under a microscope, Mike, they're absolutely horrific. If you've ever looked at an electron microscope of your own blood, which I have, what goes on under that microscope on a minute-to-minute basis is pretty chilling. That's why we don't have electronic microscopes built into our eyes, because we couldn't handle the things that are going on a microscopic level. But sorry, I interrupted.
No, that's fine. That works very well. So, and we'll just end for the mail with this one from today. How Bill Gates warned in 2015 TED Talk that the next big threat to humanity was a highly infectious virus that we're not ready for. Now, the Daily Mail here isn't really asking, well, why weren't we ready for this? This is an opportunity for an investigation here. Why were we not ready for it? Because this is a fair point. Bill Gates did warn in 2015. On Wednesday's program, Brian was highlighting a Rockefeller Foundation document which was highlighting something similar. They were having a look into the future, a what if something like this were to happen, how would people deal with it, and so on.
But look at the caveat below, Mike. If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's going to be an infectious disease. Well, we're not looking at numbers of 10 million dead from this. Okay, not even close. We're not even in the ballpark of the Spanish flu after even the first 6 months of the Spanish flu. We're not even in that realm, but yet everything is being sort of put into that category and classified as a universal pandemic. So if you could look back at a lot of things that Bill Gates has been saying this actually for 20 years. Okay, so this has really been his side career after Microsoft, which is spreading information and the use of vaccines globally. Okay, that is his mission. So of course he's going to be saying that as far back as
Absolutely, but what does the Mail do? They regurgitate it. They don't actually challenge it or ask the relevant questions. That's the point I was making there. So the Daily Mail, they view this reporting of this event as the thing which is going to define their careers. I don't think they're doing a terribly great job so far, Patrick. They need to change their tack.
Well, I think it has defined them. I think after this crisis is over, a lot of people are going to be looking at the way the media have been driving these narratives like they have with other crises in the past, including the war on terror. And obviously it's not going to help the mainstream media in their sort of battle to regain credibility. Again, they're doubling down on the same tactics that they have used in the past that have put them in this position of low public trust. And then they're also lashing out with these various initiatives, quangos with government to fight fake news and disinformation. We'll talk a bit more about that in a few minutes.
But just before we move on, the last thing I'll say on this, Patrick, is of course the Daily Mail started these headlines well before this disease ever came into this country. So the public was absolutely primed before this disease came into this country that it was going to be serious.
Vis-a-vis China, it was all China fear porn.
But it was
they were pushing.
It was all the same language. Deadly this, fatal that, fatalities. Everybody's going to die. It was. You're right. The word fear porn is absolutely appropriate in this case.
So people in the West have been conditioned while they were for the last couple of months before it became a thing here.
Yes.
They've been conditioned to believe that this is like the plague.
Absolutely.
That it's a death sentence if somebody coughs on you that might be infected with coronavirus. A lot of people I've spoken to, and of course you too, and a lot of people listening will probably have that same experience. That's the general impression that the public has from the media, even from government, who seem to be very much coalescing with the media in terms of the narratives and the language. There's very similar. So this idea that it's a death sentence if you get the coronavirus, this is totally prevalent across the West. But it's not the same in Asia, Mike. They don't have the same level of panic in Asia. They don't have it in Singapore. We spoke to people in Singapore, Malaysia, Vietnam, China, Japan, South Korea. We've spoken to all of these various people over the last couple of weeks. They don't have that same level of hysteria. Why is the West managing this different from a media and public relations point of view? Why are governments in the West taking this approach when in Asia, where the epicenter of the pandemic is, how come they're not reacting in the same way across Asia? Wouldn't you think they'd be at higher risk because they're in closer proximity to the epicenter of the pandemic? But yet it's very cool, calm, and collected in Asia.
Keep that question in mind, because we'll be coming onto that a little bit later. But before we do that, let's just mention the fact that, of course, you would have heard about chloroquine about a week ago if you'd been watching the UK column news, but it took the Telegraph until yesterday to decide that that's something they need to discuss. Chloroquine is a 70-year-old treatment for malaria, the key to beating coronavirus. And of course, one of the things that China has done is that they've been looking at various antiviral medications that are older and seeing whether they have it has any efficacy in this case. And now the French are discovering that the Chinese were right on this, and it does seem to have some efficacy in this case. Well, a bit of news from the United States side, because Bayer in the US has donated 3 million malaria tablets to the US for potential use against coronavirus. Will Donald Trump and the US authorities use them? That's another question. Or perhaps the West is looking at another strategy for dealing with this. Well, look, let's just have a look at Germany, because this is quite an interesting. Germany's a bit of an outlier, Patrick, because so far it has had 16,666 cases, but only 44 deaths. Now you compare that to Italy or to Spain or even to the United Kingdom, and that is a pretty impressive statistic. And the question on many people's minds is why? Well, I'm just going to offer one potential answer to this. I'm not saying this is the answer, but it's one potential answer, and that is this. Germany has 25,000 beds available in intensive care with respiratory support in their health service. Italy only has 5,000 beds. The UK only has 4,000 beds. So when Boris Johnson says that the UK is following Italy, I wonder whether this is the reason that he makes that statement, because he recognises that the NHS is woefully undersupplied in terms of intensive care beds for this type of situation. Germany in a much, much better position, and I think we're seeing the results of that.
Just look at those numbers, Mike, and tell me, this is a quiz for everybody out there, which two of those three countries are more likely to be overwhelmed by a sudden health crisis? Is it A, Germany? Is it B, Italy? Or is it C, the UK? You can pick 2 out of 3. So this is not a trick question, by the way.
It's not a coincidence that it shows red for the UK and orange for Italy.
So what have those Germans done, Mike, that makes them so well equipped? I guess they just have more facilities available.
Absolutely.
They've allocated more resources to their national health system. So
absolutely.
No surprise there.
Now, what's the Italian situation, Patrick? Because Italy seems to have released some statistics now.
No, this is a story that has gone very much under the radar in terms of mainstream coverage. I mean, this is the type of thing you'd want to be celebrating when you see this type of headline, but unfortunately this does a tremendous amount of damage to the fear mongers, Mike. This is a study from the Italian Health Services, which just came out 2 days ago. Read this headline closely. 99% of those who died from the virus had other illnesses.
So did they die from the virus?
They didn't. In fact, 100% of the people did not die from the coronavirus. And again, this isn't how we're framing the language of this crisis. Let's look at some of the numbers, shall we? We'll just move on to the next slide. And the coronavirus in Italy, this is from their Institute of Health here. The average age of the deceased, 81 years old. 10% of the deceased over 90, 90% over 70 years old. 80% of the deceased have 2 or more chronic illnesses. Respiratory illnesses are at the top of that list, and 50% of the deceased 3 or more chronic illnesses. Look at those last 2 statistics, Mike. That is pretty incredible right there. And 0.08% of
0.8%.
Sorry, 0.08% have of the deceased have not had any chronic illnesses. So 5 people deceased under 40, all with severe pre-existing conditions. Look at that very closely, and what does that tell you? Okay, that tells you that the people who have died in Italy, this supposed contagion, this pandemic in Italy, all of the afflicted have had, in most cases, multiple severe underlying pre-existing health conditions. Now, anybody looking at this with a logical approach, maybe a more critical approach, a rational approach, might look at those statistics and pause for a minute and say to yourself, who is really in the highest risk category? And in terms of case fatality rates, this is actually a very important question to ask. This is not a death sentence for anybody that catches it. When you look at that, if you just isolated all of the people, if you're cared about loss of life, you should really focus, now that we have data, on the people who are at the highest risk, Mike, at the highest risk. Because at the end of the day, this is another strain of the flu. No one died from coronavirus. They've all died from things like pneumonia and secondary infections. And so in terms of resources, Mike, then you have to look at treatment right there, because people are going to be in high-risk categories. They might catch the virus. This might lead to complications, respiratory complications, and then, of course, the problem and the focus is on treatment, pharmaceutical treatment, but also clinical care as well. So these are things that Italy has learned. They've released this data, and I do not see this in the headlines on the BBC. We don't see it in all of the major mainstream media outlets in the UK, the US, or in the English-speaking language media. We've seen it in a few places, Mike, but this is absolutely central to this whole discussion. And the same with Spain, by the way, and a higher incidence of smokers. You had a pneumonia and Legionnaires outbreak in northern Italy just in the fall and in parts of 2019. Why aren't these stories being looked at more closely? The Italians are looking at them, and I think when this crisis is over, there's going to be a lot of interesting takeaways from this. It really deserves a sober analysis. Analysis. It's not happening right now.
Yeah, indeed. But don't worry, Patrick, because coronavirus vaccine trials are likely to be starting in the UK next month if Public Health England gives the go-ahead for that. So that's clearly where the main focus is in the UK and in the United States as well.
Well, that's another point. Actually, we'll go back to that point, Mike.
Yes.
Again, the flu vaccine. There is competing theories and challenges back and forth in terms of the efficacy of the flu shot, being able to keep up with flu strains and so forth. And there are reports and studies that indicate in multiple countries, in multiple markets, that it is possible that the flu shot itself might also make some people sick. Not all people, but some people maybe have a compromised immune system. And again, that puts us back into that argument about high-risk categories. So what percentage of elderly people in Lombardy had the flu shot? Again, these are other sort of data points that people could be looking at afterwards. Also vaping. Vaping is a big public health issue in the UK, in Europe, in the US. In the last 12 months, go look at the headlines. This was a huge public health crisis, we were told, vaping. And even so much so that the US government was being pressured to put more regulation and possibly put an age limit and all sorts of restrictions on vaping because it was a public health crisis and people were having respiratory issues. So would that not put people in, again, a high-risk category or something like this. So there's a lot, what I'm saying is there's a lot of things going on in society in terms of high risk health challenges that are making people immune compromised. These also have to be looked at, as well as the quote pandemic. Otherwise, you're not going to get an accurate picture of what is the real risk in terms of public health in sort of large numbers.
So let's move on to censorship then, Patrick. And well, this is Financial Times here. Their headline is "Huge Text Message Campaign Spread Coronavirus Fake News." Was this the Russians?
Yeah, if only, if only. Don't worry, Mike, they will blame the Russians. Just give it a couple of weeks. But if you look at the headlines, now we'll give you a little Media 101 lesson here. Whenever you see a story cascading across every media outlet within a 24-hour window, a little alarm bell should go off in your back of your mind saying something else is possibly at play here. Well, let's just take a look at a few of these headlines. So they're really making a move towards encrypted messaging and social media, but specifically they're targeting WhatsApp. It's the most important, popular, encrypted end-to-end encryption chat service, social networking service, really, that's out there. So let's take a look at some of these headlines. This one, huge text message campaign spread coronavirus fake news. And of course, here's Reuters, coronavirus conspiracies go viral on WhatsApp as crisis deepens. So they're inferring here that WhatsApp is pushing the crisis, basically, that it's putting lives at risk, these rumors online. And here's Mother Jones, a paragon of journalistic integrity, of course. WhatsApp is a petri dish of coronavirus misinformation. And this author, she was pointing out a few of the things that were being claimed on WhatsApp, and one of them was that the coronavirus can't survive in high temperatures. She seemed particularly concerned with that point in saying that this was an egregious fake news, this rumor that the coronavirus can't survive in high temperatures. I thought that was interesting considering we're coming into spring and summer right now in the Northern Hemisphere. So we don't want anybody thinking that somehow the influenza is going to subside during the spring and summer months as it normally does every year throughout history. But no, Mother Jones has another idea of what's going on there. And here's, of course, CNN. We can't leave out this barrage without CNN. Facebook has a coronavirus problem. It's WhatsApp. So, well, what does this really mean? The next thing we'll explain. This is what it's all about, ladies and gentlemen. This is a bill that is being rammed through the U.S. legislative process. It's called Earn It. And it's a bill, the government would like to scan every online message, including those from these types of services. What does this mean? Well, the Americans love their acronyms, Mike, you know that. Earn It stands for Eliminating Abusive and Rampant Neglect of Interactive Technologies Act of 2020. And this is originally designed to stop child trafficking and child pornography with these various dark web user groups who are using WhatsApp for this type of thing. So this is what it's for, but you look at all the headlines I've just showed you, Mike. It seems like the media is in lockstep with this legislation, but not for reasons of protecting children, but for saving people against fake news about the coronavirus. Now, the sponsors of this bill are Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal. They're front-running this bill. Every piece of bad police state legislation, you'll normally find Lindsey Graham from South Carolina behind it, because he does love authoritarian legislation and war, etc. But here's what Richard Blumenthal said, and it's often been said that politicians are snakes in the grass. Well, look at this statement here by the Connecticut senator. This bill says nothing about encryption. Have you found a word in this bill about encryption? He asks one of his persons there who witnessed this conversation. And the point here, Mike, is that well, Electronic Frontier Foundation will make the point, but of course it doesn't mention encryption, Mike, but they want to read the messages at source with the provider, so they don't technically have to break encryption with this legislation. It's going to give 100% access by government and law enforcement officials to every single message that's sent with the providers themselves. So it's not about intercepting or getting even a back door. They want to get it at source on the server. from the companies. So this is like unprecedented access here. But let's look at what the Electronic Frontier Foundation, this is a digital rights and privacy advocacy group, saying you can't have an internet where messages are screened en masse. They're talking about screened by the government, okay? And also have end-to-end encryption any more than you can create backdoors that can only be used by the good guys. That makes sense. So the two are mutually exclusive. Concepts like client-side scanning aren't a clever route around this, such as scanning is just another way to break end-to-end encryption. Either the message remains private to everyone but its recipients, or it's available to others, and they mean all others.
Yes.
In that case. So the case there, Mike, is pretty clear, and this is an absolute clear case of the government using another crisis like this coronavirus pandemic to advance a piece of anti-privacy legislation. I think that's pretty clear, and Mike, the media are completely coordinated right now in the last 24 hours, hitting WhatsApp. Every single outlet across the board. You cannot tell me that that's just a coincidence.
No, this is the rapid response mechanism. You have a common narrative. It's pushed out on every possible official channel, and the mainstream media now is, unfortunately, an official government channel. The mainstream media can't argue against that at this stage because there is there's no sense of independence in anything that they're doing at the moment.
And I might just quickly add, Mike, that Facebook has unleashed its real-time independent fact-checking service across all Facebook groups. You'll probably see that articles and posts are now being challenged. This is probably AI-driven. This is not human fact-checking. There might be a human appeal or something towards the end if it's a third-party service. So Facebook has now made that active because of the coronavirus. And by the way, a couple of days ago, on Sunday night, all of 21st Century Wire's archive, 10 years of articles, was erased from Facebook, from my page, from our fan page, but also from groups. Every single post from 21st Century Wire was erased. So we began the process of appealing as many of these posts as possible. And a few hours later, and I put a lot of them to human review. Okay, and for some reason, I think maybe an admin saw what was happening, but this also coincided with Facebook admitting that it deleted millions and millions of posts, even mainstream posts about the coronavirus during that same day. And they said there was a glitch in their system. But what they were doing was trying to erect a great information firewall with regards to the coronavirus, and it went horribly wrong. The algorithms targeted mainstream media articles, and then they got a lot of complaints from corporate media. This is why they pulled it back late on Sunday night. And then we had some of our posts and began to be reinstated gradually, and then I began to see all of our articles reappearing after that. So we were caught in that net, but they did a blanket ban on our URL, which was interesting. And I think some other websites might have had the same situation. But that shows you, in terms of censorship, the corporations are taking advantage as well of this crisis in order to roll out some very draconian censorship programs in terms of muffling information. It's really political commentary, and sites that provide political analysis, these are being targeted as well.
Well, just to reinforce that, this is what YouTube was pushing out yesterday. I'm sure they're pushing out today as well. Important, due to COVID-19, we will conduct fewer human reviews to protect the health of our extended workforce. Unfortunately, as a result, we may remove content which does not violate our community guidelines.
Does not.
Yes. So what they're saying is, what they're acknowledging here is that their AI often will penalize content not correctly as being in breach of community guidelines. They do offer the opportunity for people to put that into human review, and the human gets the opportunity to decide whether that was a correct decision or not. But in this case, they aren't going to have as many humans available to do that. So basically, tough luck. Expect extra censorship.
That's unbelievable, actually. That's pretty unbelievable.
Well, look, we are really out of time, Patrick.
Carry on.
But I'd like to continue with this, and I want to mention this. video which one of our members posted to the UK column forums yesterday. It's from Mahmoud El-Wadi, and he works in Wall Street. And he's really looking at the coronavirus and saying, well, what's going on here? And he blames the Chinese for it. So China did this to the world is basically what he's saying. He's saying that the reason that China did this was because they want to mess up the Western economy, that they're willing to sacrifice 3,000 Chinese lives in order to do that. So they released the virus on us all, and they're hiding the information about how they dealt with it. Therefore, it's all China's fault. Now, of course, China hasn't been hiding the information about how they dealt with it. There's PubMed, one example in this case talking about chloroquine. This is Bioscience Trends, also talking about chloroquine phosphate, a separate report. Actually, China has been quite open about how they've dealt with it. So the question then, Patrick, is this something? Well, the question we really need to ask with all these sorts of things is who benefits? Does it benefit China to do what this guy is suggesting, which is to unleash something which will affect the economic situation in the rest of the world? At first glance, it might appear to be the case, but actually, if you think about it, China is holding hundreds of billions of dollars of Western debt. If China destroys the Western economy, they have no prospect of getting that money back. Not only that, it's
one of their biggest markets in terms of export.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So is it in China's interest to do this? That's a matter of debate. But Wall
Street-driven conspiracy theories. Now, there's so many pundits and false prophets right now that are live streaming. It's absolutely unbelievable. Everybody's got the inside track, or there's a lot of things that are some dubious things that are kicking around right now on all platforms right now. I think a lot of people who are discerning news readers can figure out what's legitimate and what's not, of course.
Absolutely. So getting back to the question of who benefits, well, who does benefit? Well, the West benefits because we were sitting on a financial system which really is struggling at the moment. Suddenly, Mark Carney on Monday was able to reduce the interest rates by 0.5% to 0.25%. This would not have been possible under normal circumstances. The emergency allowed him to do that. Then his successor here, basically talking about universal basic income, another policy that they've been talking about for a long time, but really hasn't been able to gain much traction. Suddenly, it's gaining lots of traction.
Oh, because it's seen as a fait accompli now, Mike.
Absolutely.
This is amazing.
Absolutely. So when we ask who benefits, it's certainly not China. Their major market, their major export market, is in the process of shutting itself down, But pension schemes are in the process. Well, of course, that benefits the Western system because most of these pension schemes don't have the money to pay out their obligations. Suddenly, they've got an excuse for not being able to pay out these their obligations. People's pension expectations have collapsed in the last 2 or 3 weeks. So, there are questions to be asked about this. I don't think what is going on here is real. The Western governments have made some decisions to use this pandemic, in inverted commas, to push through some pretty significant policy decisions that they've been trying to get through for a very long time, and they're doing it with this as the excuse. And I think people need to be asking some serious questions about that.
To put it very simply, in terms of this crisis, look at the country or look at individuals as a balance sheet. The debt is loading up on the public side because of this crisis. And where is that debt coming from? Who is issuing that debt? This is coming from the banks, from central banks. So the public is getting poorer, saddled with more debt. Individuals are being given loans like sweeties right now from banks, and government is funneling lots of public spending. That's all has to be paid for, has to be paid back to the banks. So the national and personal balance sheets are going really heavy on debt right now because of this. So who's the winner there? Who increases their ownership, their the assets on their ledger? Definitely the banks. Big corporations who have cash are buying up whole sections of the competition of industries for pennies on the dollar. The longer this crisis goes, the cheaper it's going to be for people with money to scoop up just about anything they possibly can. We'll do maybe a more of a detailed financial analysis. We might do another special program just looking at the macro finance of this crisis, because I think that's a really important issue. But there's other beneficiaries, Mike, and I want to point out, well, this is a particularly deadly combination. This is Bono and the coronavirus. This will definitely induce nausea in quite a few people, if it hasn't already. Bono was so inspired, Mike, by the Italians singing out their windows that he decided to write a song singing across the rooftops about the coronavirus, and planning the music video, and of course it's going to be on a rooftop like The Streets Have No Name, sort of reminiscing the 80s. So, you know, Bono has taken the challenge, and he's going to deliver a song for everybody, and, you know, very happy. Everyone should be really happy about that. Davos is extremely excited, but I want to leave everybody with one final potential public safety crisis here. Public safety alert, and we don't say this lightly. O.J. Simpson says that he will go crazy if all the golf courses are closed due to the coronavirus. Okay, so I think, do we have a clip from this?
We do have a clip from this. We'll play out with it. We'll try to get it right this time.
But before we play it, I just want to say to the city of Las Vegas, for the love of God, please keep the golf courses open. The last thing we need is OJ going crazy. So
here he is.
Hey, Twitter world, yours truly. Well, we got to finish our round of golf today. They said they were going to close the golf course at one point, but they let everybody finish their round of golf, and now they're saying they're going to be closed, and other courses are talking about closing. But, you know, I thought the course did the right thing today. They closed the clubhouse, so you couldn't go in for breakfast or anything. But on the golf course, guys aren't that close to each other. What they did today, they gave everybody single golf carts, and they told you not to take the pin out, and I don't take the pin out anyway. But I play in a club here, and there's a lot of older guys in that club, and some of them at one point had strokes. They don't walk that well, and they'll never go hiking. And as I say, they don't really take long walks. Their only exercise is playing golf. So I kind of understand what the golf courses are doing. I'm not going to criticize them, but you know, you let guys have their own golf cart. You tell them not to, you know, pull the pin out. I guess you don't touch the pin. You don't really get that close to one another on a golf course, and I think for some of the older guys that golf is their only exercise, I think it's going to hurt them if you start closing all the golf courses. I'm just saying, and if you do close them, you better open up some insane asylum, get me a bed, because I know if I can't play golf for the next month, I'm going to go crazy. I'm just saying, take care.
Okay, so hopefully on that lighthearted note, we'll leave you for this week. Thanks very much for joining us. Thank you for your input today, Patrick, and we'll be back at the same time as usual on Monday. See you then. Bye-bye.